I don't know how much time you should dedicate to detailing a map. For me, it's by far the most time-intensive and frustrating part of making it. It's the one bit that doesn't add to the gameplay, but simply scares people off if it isn't up to scratch. It's sad, but an overwhelming majority of people who will view your map will judge it based on the pictures, without a care in the world for how well it plays. This makes me wonder if perhaps CSGO isn't the most fun of games to play, if looks mean so much when deciding whether or not to download a map. Disparity was going to be set on a farm. I pictured it being hazy, with the sun just coming up. Everything would be cold and frosty looking, glistening in the morning sun or something gay like that. Obviously that would require a lot of custom models and textures, plus fog is never a good idea for a competitive map, so I switched it to a snowy town in the mountains, inspired from various pictures I looked up on Google. Let me introduce you to Vexx. She's a woman. She maps. I like mapping with women because they think in a different way. While I was picturing vast snowy expanses and the gameplay implications, she went, "Oh cool, can we have a frozen lake with fish underneath?" That was her first contribution to the project, and not something that I would have thought up in a million years. She was adamant about including it, and I was just like, yeah sure, whatever. Later on she worked on the marketplace, hand placing baskets and all of the little details that I simply couldn't be bothered with. It's so obvious, people. All you have to do is to watch your sister decorating her house in Skyrim or The Sims. It doesn't take much to realise that women are perfect mapping partners. They're particularly fun to work with during the more boring parts of mapping, where you need a shoulder to cry on. Disparity took a long time to detail. I'm very proud of my lighting. Time and time again, boring looking maps have been saved by a simple adjustment to the colour and brightness of the level. Elysium very nearly looked like this, until we made it bright orange. It's something that I wouldn't have dared to before, but now I believe that the more garish, the better. Within reason. With Disparity, after getting the initial layout sorted, I looked for a suitable skybox for the theme of the map, and sure enough, the one for Monastery fitted perfectly and had the sun breaking through the clouds on the horizon. I've said before that a map has to be sunny, but that's not quite the end of it. I like it to be sunny, but from a shallow angle. This leads to long, stretched shadows which help to decorate otherwise boring looking sunny walls. The shaded corners, on the other hand, can be lit up with electric lights. This gives you control over the colour palette of the level. Of course, lots of shaded areas can cause problems with visibility. You want enemies to be easily seen, and so I deliberately coated the map with bright looking surfaces. In Dust 2 you have yellow sand. In Disparity you have snow and colourful walls. These don't just look pretty, but also reflect a lot of light around the level, something very important for illuminating the more secluded areas. You could argue that at this early, simple stage, the map already looks pretty thanks to its contrast between the bright yellow sunshine and blue glow of the snow. Once you have something like this to build on, it makes it far easier to stay motivated. Everybody laughs at this tower, but it serves an important purpose. I deliberately made it visible from everywhere so that people could almost navigate the world from it, much like the Citadel in Half-Life 2. I guess it's sort of sacrilegious to then base a church off of it, but it fitted the map perfectly and would help add diversity into what would otherwise be a boring map filled with samey buildings. Every map needs something memorable. Something where you can tell which map it is simply by glancing at a screenshot, and the church was just that for this map. I was aware that I was at risk of copying my earlier D Balfour map with its church and graveyard theme, but at the same time thought it would be the perfect opportunity to see how much I had improved since then when attempting the same sort of map. Bombsite A was the first place that was detailed. I'll go more into how I decorated it in the next video, but I wanted to create a series of props that could then be copy-pasted to other parts of the map later on. This didn't end up happening since it was only really this area that was detailed in this way. I'm happy with how it turned out, and later versions following the initial release of the map looked even better, though I can't talk about it just now. That wouldn't be fair. The middle of the map began life as a burnt out barn. I personally really enjoy adding in bricks and jagged edges to structures, so I took the plunge and made the house in the space of about 20 minutes. It stood the test of time and remained similar to the final version. In fact, it had even more detail at this early stage before it was simplified for gameplay reasons. And that brings us to the warehouses. What on earth are factories doing up here in the mountains, next to a quaint little village? It didn't take too much effort to realise that it created a lot of contrast, almost like a battle going on within the map. In fact, it made even more sense than a map entirely set in a quaint little village. Why not have one half of the map filled with industrial, depressing stuff, and say that the terrorists are paid by this evil corporation to blow up the nice looking bits of the town to make way for future expansion? Heck, there's already a blown up building in the middle. Perhaps this could have been a previous bomb site that the terrorists had successfully blown up. If anything, this map's theme has been my most successful so far, and Vexx was very positive about the idea, as if the final part of the puzzle had been slotted in and it now all made sense. In fact, I started going off topic with the detailing later on, and she had to remind me about the setting to bring me back on track. As much as possible, I wanted to add in inaccessible areas for players to peer into. I felt that this would make it feel less like a map and more like a real place. I'm not happy with the level of detail these locations received. It still feels as though they're an afterthought, but they're a step up from previous maps of mine where it's very much self-contained. And I believe that covers most of the map. Early designs had the town at the foot of a large mountain, but none of the existing props were detailed enough to pull it off, and the amount of effort that would have had to have gone into making one from scratch simply wasn't worth it. I would have liked for the town area to be on the edge of the mountain, as if it was being pushed off the side by the factories. I suppose I kind of managed it with CT spawn and the snowy ground far below. I was very concerned about having to connect it with the 3D skybox to show the mountain stretching down below, but I didn't have to worry about that either. It was enough to simply stretch the snowy plains out far enough to hide the ends out of sight. In other words, I was horribly lazy with this map, but it turned out okay. In fact, the amount of botching that went into this map was quite incredible, though I don't think that anybody would have noticed if I hadn't made this video. Compare this with Elysium, where I had made the entire skybox before starting on the main world. That Martian crater is still my favourite 3D skybox from any of my maps. The skybox in Disparity consists of about 10 props. There are a couple of mountains, a dome of cloud going overhead, and then some distant clouds stolen from Mirage. These are the ones I'm the most proud of. They go brilliantly with the mountains behind them and give the whole place a very Skyrim-esque feel. And yes, I do like Skyrim. And there you have it, an overview of how a boxy map became a real place. Sort of. It could have very easily been almost anything. It could have been set in downtown New York, or in a cave system. But at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter. Choosing the initial theme has never been a big thing for me. I could have rolled a dice to decide on it. It's developing the individual areas so that they are interesting and yet still fit in with the bigger picture that's the problem. And now for clips of playtesting done at this stage. Balthazar provided very down-to-earth feedback. Here he is suggesting that Shay should go.
Yeah, he just doesn't really fit in with northern climates.
And now he's telling me that it needs more sunshine. I thought that was my job.
I'd say if you could probably get about like as I enter this area from here, for example, very little of the area's got sunshine. Yes, it does. It's sort of illuminating him in this holy light.
And now for Welshie's well-educated and detailed feedback.
Oh, it's black. Ooh, it looks like poo.
Yeah, what useless feedback. I'll decide to ignore everything he just said. It's clearly not important in the slightest. Thank you for watching. I'll provide more of these clips in future episodes.